Hi folks, this is Jason and I hope you're okay today. I just want to share with you for a little time about Greg Bahnsen and his influence on me in apologetics. As people know, I've studied at 2 theological seminaries and read a lot of different theological books and apologetic works, and I have to say that I've never met an apologist and his apologetic that is more devastating to skepticism than Greg Bahnsen's apologetic method. For me, I'm influenced by a number of streams of. I don't just have one method. I'm not tied into presuppositional apologetics alone. I believe in using other methodologies as well. I've used the minimal fact approach. I've used other methodologies and stuff like that. And so, I'm not advocating a one apologetic method. I think Francis Schaeffer used evidentialism and presuppositionalism together. But in terms of as an apologetic, I just want to share with you what Greg Bahnsen has done for me in my faith, and share a little bit about Greg Bahnsen. I listened to a number of his lectures and found them immensely stimulating, immensely strengthening. The sheer robustness of the guy, his lectures, especially when it comes to skepticism, are absolutely devastating. And I found the way he conducted himself was, and the arguments that he used, they were very powerful arguments. His lectures on how to defend the faith, how to do an internal critique of another person's worldview, his understanding of worldview, and all these things have been helpful to me. His understanding of philosophy, his papers on ancient Greek philosophy, his papers on skepticism have been an absolute blessing and sheer joy for me. I can honestly say that I've never read or listened who has encouraged me and strengthened my belief in Christianity as Greg Bahnsen. He was influenced by Cornelius Van Til, and he's done a lecture on Cornelius Van Til. Cornelius Van Til said, "All reasoning is in the nature of the case circular reasoning. The starting point, the method, and the conclusion are always involved in one another." Van Til, The Defense of Faith, page 101. So Greg Bahnsen was influenced by Van Til. Because I'm influenced by Greg Bahnsen doesn't mean to say that I actually endorse everything that he believed. I think he went overboard with the Rushuni movement that wanted to apply law of the Old Testament to politics, and I think that Greg Bahnsen went and became a bit unbalanced there. But having said that, you can't get away from the fact that he was a brilliant as a philosopher, and that his training in philosophy was masterful in his defense of the Christian faith. So what is presuppositional apologetics? And presuppositional apologetics is basically looking at the presuppositions of a person's position. Everybody has a worldview. The atheist who said that they don't believe in God due to a lack of evidence, because there's a lack of evidence, has a worldview, and we can critique that worldview. And as we critique it, we begin to see problems. So if you look at like Bertrand Russell, Why I'm Not a Christian, New York, and Schuster, 1957, he says, "The man is a product of cause which had no prevision of the end they were achieving, that his origin, his growth, his hopes, fears, his loves and beliefs are but the outcome of accidental collocations of atoms, that no fire, no heroism, no intensity of thought and feeling can preserve an individual life beyond the grave, that all labours of the ages, all the devotion, all the inspiration, all the noonday brightness of human genius are destined to extinction, that the whole temple of man's achievements must inevitably be buried. All these things, if not quite beyond dispute, are yet so nearly certain that no philosophy which rejects them can hope to stand. Only within the scaffolding of these truths only can the soul's habitation henceforth be safely built. Now, if you unpack that, there's lots of ideas there underlying what he's saying about reality. He's assuming that there is no supernatural realm. He's assuming knowledge, that there is some kind of knowledge about the universe. He's assuming all sorts of things that, philosophically speaking, you can call him out on and question him. So what a presuppositional apologist does is basically critique a person's pre-ideas. You see, take an empiricist. Say someone believes the only knowledge that we can have is empiricism, that is scientific knowledge. A presuppositionalist would call such a would challenge the underlying preconceptions to that worldview. So, for example, the empiricist says, well, the only knowledge that we can have is scientific knowledge of the senses, etc. And so you can question, well, is all that there is the material? And we can show that logic is not material, which would dent empiricism. We can show that contingency is assumed in natural events, and that presupposes a maker. We can question presuppositions, we can look at the nature of logic, and what we're doing is we're peeling back empiricism and seeing that behind empiricism lies ideas that are assumed and not proven. And what we do then is look whether those ideas are consistent with reality or not. So that's the kind of presuppositional methodology. You can talk about the nature of truth, like Seitan does. You can talk about the nature of logic, which Greg Bahnsen would do. But all your time, what you're doing is you're recognizing that every person has ideas behind their ideas that they cannot prove, and that we have to look at and question. In 2029, in the presuppositional concept of presupposition, this is interesting. Don Collett argues that traditional forms of argument do not do justice to presupposition as a concept. He works from Peter Strawson's semantic account of presupposition. According to Strawson, a statement A may be said to presuppose a statement B if B is a necessary precondition of the truth or falsity of A. Strawson's interpretation of the concept stated in succinct fashion by Baes van Frassen as follows: a presupposition B if only if A is neither true nor false unless B is true. This may be stated as follows: A presupposes B if only if A is true, then B is true. If A is true, then B is true. Colette Van Til and the transcendental argument revisited. There are potential difficulties with the account of presupposition in question, and where Colette goes from here as well, but the purpose of this post is not to delve into these problems. There is also no effort made to discuss the depth, the pragmatic account of presupposition or its consequence, especially with respect to covenantal apologetics. Rather, I merely point out that Bahnsen's understanding of presupposition appears to be much more in line with what is known as presupposition rather than the semantic account. There are in philosophy two traditional accounts of presupposition. One is semantic while the other pragmatic. P.F. Strawson writes, a statement S presupposes a statement S in the sense that the truth of S is a precondition of the truth and falsity of S. Strawson, Introduction to Logical Theory, 175. Note then, if S is false, then S is neither true nor false. The semantic concept of presupposition requires truth-value gaps. On this conception of presupposition, not every proposition is true or false. Others have disregard with the after-mentioned account of presupposition and argued for a pragmatic concept instead. Quote, the pragmatic conception does not appeal to truth conditions, but instead contrasts what a speaker presupposes and what that speaker asserts. So you can see presuppositions are beliefs that the speaker takes for granted. If these beliefs are false, the utterance will be inappropriate in some way, but it does not follow that the sentence utters lack a truth value. It speakers rather than sentences or statements that have presuppositions. No truth value gaps are required. Audi, Cambridge Dictionary of Philosophy, page 735. We read from Van Til, Bahnsen on Van Til Apologetic, a presupposition is an elementary assumption in one's reasoning or in the process by which opinions are formed. In this book, a presupposition is not just any assumption in an argument, but a personal commitment that is held at the most basic level of one's network of beliefs. Presuppositions form a wide-ranging foundational perspective or starting point in terms of which everything else is interpreted and evaluated. Authority in one's thinking being treated as one's least negotiable beliefs are being granted the highest immunity to revision. So basically there, what I've just given you is to show you that not even Christian apologists or even skeptical apologists would recognize or really understand that there's actually in philosophy complex nuances about what a presupposition is. But what I'm showing you there is Greg Bahnsen had a particular understanding of what a presupposition is. I think maybe, I couldn't prove it, but I think maybe that's influenced by not just Calvin, not just Cornelius van Til, but also by Dutch Reformed Calvinist philosophers and theologians. That's just an aside. The point that I'm getting at now, I know that was very complex for some of you, but the point what I'm trying is Greg Bahnsen's idea of presuppositions, what a person holds that's unproven, and assumptions, and then what Greg Bahnsen would do then is take those presuppositions and test them against reality. So a typical example would be to take a skeptic, a typical atheist, and then what he would do is he would say, okay, let me test your presuppositions, the ideas that you have that you can't prove. For example, your view of reality that you say, most atheists will say, not all, but all that there is the material. Greg Bahnsen would say, well, let's critique this presupposition, and then he would say, is the law of non-contradiction, is that material or immaterial? The atheist, being honest, would say it's immaterial, and then he would say, well, that's contradicting your worldview that all there is the material. So what he's done an internal critique. Another example, he would take the Quran and he would do an internal critique of Islam, showing the inconsistency of that worldview, specifically looking at the Quran itself and seeing how its claims for authority don't stack up, that there are contradictions within those claims. For example, in the Quran, it claims to be the word of God, and Muslims then throw the charge that the Bible's changed, but yet within the Islamic system, if you go to Bukhari Hadith and you read about Uthman, he burned Quranic texts in order to make one recension. So Greg Bahnsen would look at the internal inconsistencies within some of the foundational beliefs of Islam and show the inconsistency. Greg Bahnsen did it with evolution, provided some of the deconstructed it in such a brilliant way by showing, for example, the mathematical probability improbability of evolution, etc. So what you're doing is, what I like about Greg Bahnsen, what encourages me, what strengthens my faith, is he encourages you to be bold in critiquing other people's views, other people's ideas, their pre-ideas, and to do an internal critique of those ideas, to recognize that every person has a worldview, beliefs about reality that need to be challenged. So I can only say that I've been to 2 seminaries, I've read many apologetic books, I've read philosophers like Foucault and people like that, and I can honestly say I've not read anybody as powerful and my faith as Greg Bahnsen. And I owe him an eternal debt, because he really, really has been a great blessing to me. If you type in True Forms Greg Bahnsen, you'll be able to find a website where you can read Greg Bahnsen's articles, and they'll be a blessing to you. So I'd encourage you to read Greg Bahnsen. Listen to his videos. You can go on YouTube and find his videos, and I'd encourage you to look into him. He is absolutely brilliant, and I just love the guy, and I owe him an immense debt from God. Thank you for listening, and God bless you.